Welcome to Mountains Made Low, where we help you encounter the love of God and live well in the modern world. I'm Dennis Mueller.
And I'm Christine Reagan.
And today's topic really stems from a lot of questions that Christine and I get asked pretty regularly from parishioners, especially from parents who have children that are older, who maybe have stopped going to church or have stopped believing in God altogether because of science and reason. They just can't buy into the existence of God. So I'm just curious, how often do you really get hit with that question about God's existence, or people who argue with you against the existence of God?
Yeah, I get hit with a lot just because of the setting that I'm in often, with being in the classroom with students. I find that age group is grappling with this question maybe more so than anybody else that I've encountered. Yeah. But most recently, I had dinner with one of my longest standing friends. I had dinner with her and her husband a couple months ago. And we were just talking about the nature of what it is that I do for work and how discouraging the numbers can be just in terms of worship. And I said, but ultimately, people don't worship because they don't believe that God is real or that he's important to your life. And my friend's husband asked this amazing question. He's like, what do you do about that? And I really had to think about it. And I was like, how do you, I'm trying to think of exactly how he phrased the question. But my question was, you have to appeal to people intellectually. Yeah. I have found that is the most effective thing for people, because an emotional argument can only go so far. A divine revelation, faith-based argument can only go so far if you and I are on the same page. Yeah. And I said, well, really, to introduce God to somebody, you have to appeal to them intellectually. I find that works the most. And I think it should work because God made our minds.
Right.
So he does appeal to our intellect. Yeah. And what I love about this guy is
the reason why we have an intellect.
Yeah. Is that he has a Jewish background. I mean, he is Jewish. And so he completely understood what I was talking about. And I think that has a lot of success out there in conversation. Certainly you can talk about how much God loves you, and that's fine. But what about who is God? Yeah. Does he have anything to do with the human person?
I think that's the challenge because, today you really can't start from a religious or a theological standpoint, especially if you're arguing with somebody who just doesn't buy into those arguments. Mm-hmm. They're going to be dismissive from the get-go. So you have to begin at a starting point that, like you said, from reason and intellect. I mean, this is why God gave us an intellect, so we can come to know that there has to be something greater than ourselves that's responsible for all of this stuff. Yeah. And philosophers throughout the ages, Thomas Aquinas and many others, have really reasoned through all of these arguments pretty solidly. And that's really what we want to take a look at today, because the alarming rate at which the nuns are growing worldwide should be raising concerns and red flags all over the place, regardless of your religious persuasion. Yeah. This isn't just a Catholic Church Christian issue. This is affecting religions around the world. People are growing more and more distant. And this rise of secularism has really led to this detachment from a religious affiliation, so much so that without us being tethered and grounded in certain faiths and beliefs and morals, without those, we begin to see the breakdown of the social order.
Yeah. Very quickly you move from, I just don't practice any particular faith. It can turn very quickly into, I don't have faith in anything or anybody. Yeah. Right? It's the godlessness is not that far behind.
Yeah. Science is amazing, but there's so much that science really can't answer for us. Yeah. And proof of God lies in science. I mean, we can use science to show that there has to be a God. But it really, beyond that, it really can't tell us much about God.
Yeah. Like faith extends much farther than science can go at this point. And science is able to go further and further and further. But I just see that as more of you're proving God more. You're proving God more.
And one of the things you have to remember, too, is that the originator, the creator of mathematics, the creator of
I love how specifically
physics,
sometimes you speak.
The creator of chemistry and all those things is God himself. So while they might be able to point to the existence of God, they can't contain or explain God himself.
Right. Barron does this thing where he talks about, he says, when you're using the term recognize, when you're recognizing something, it's like a recognition. You are seeing again something that you're rethinking something that's already been thought. Yeah. So you're not stumbling upon something that's brand new. You are stumbling upon something that God has already has previously created, and you're just making sense of it now. You're just discovering it now.
It's like a painting. I mean, you look at a painting, and you can certainly appreciate the talent and the techniques, and it might even reveal a little bit something about the artist himself. But you're never really going to get to know the artist through the painting unless you encounter the artist himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People say all the time that God is unscientific and unreasonable. And I'm like, really? I view all scientific discovery not as like a strike against the existence of God, but it's this uncovering of him.
Yeah.
And then just like when science makes a discovery and then tells the whole world about what it found, it's not this new thing. It's that something has been uncovered. God has been uncovered again or in a new way. Or this potential that he's given to humans. Like if humans make some kind of scientific medical discovery of a treatment, right?
Yeah.
Look how amazing is that God has given us the ability to do these things. It's not how great are humans, it's how great has God made us that we're able to co-create and cooperate with him. I mean, I just think science, I think, is always just proving God more and more and just how magnificent everything is.
Right.
And that's what's appealing to the intellect. And I think that's where you're going to have a lot of success with people in making a solid case for the existence of God.
And this is important too, because like we're talking about God right now as we're kind of getting ready to segue into the topic. But if you're not ready to have faith enter into the equation, or you don't know how to introduce God to something from a faith-based perspective and divine revelation and all that, then where we want to start is looking at the observable world around us.
Yeah.
That's the starting point for the intellect.
And what we're going to do today is we're going to go not in a super heady way, not in an overly intellectual way, but we're going to go through what Aquinas says about the world around us.
Yeah,
and
there are more brilliant minds than ours that can explain this stuff.
Oh, you're not kidding.
We're trying to make do ourselves, trying to get through some of this stuff today.
But Aquinas, back in the 13th century, he said, and he was such a faithful man, Catholic, strong believer, doctor of the church, amazing. But he's like, all of that faith-based and all of this love language, that can come later. And it's very relevant to a conversation about God. But why don't you just open your eyes and look at what exists around you? And if you do that, and if you observe the world around you, you can very reasonably and logically ascertain that, yeah, there's a God that probably exists. Yeah. And all you need to do is look. Yeah. All you need to do is listen and observe.
And this is why the Catechism of the Catholic Church, when you take a look at it, it's faith and reason.
Yeah.
They're two sides of the same coin. We think that they're diametrically opposed today.
Because they're God. God is the coin. He expresses himself this way and that way.
Right.
It's not either or. Come on.
Right. So to say that science and faith, science and religion is incompatible is really a complete misunderstanding of the nature of how the two of these things work. One really leads to the other and vice versa.
Have you ever asked somebody, who do you think invented science? Like, where do you think science came from? Yeah. It's like as though science is this thing in opposition to God and they're just like two sides of the force. Like, no, this just doesn't work. That's not an accurate representation of what science is and how that knowledge comes to us. So what I explained to my friend that night at dinner is that if you can engage people's minds and engage their logic, they become a lot more responsive, I think, to the stuff of eternal life that's revealed in divine revelation and in things like the incarnation and salvation. Stuff like that. So if you want people to talk about heaven, let's start with the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this will be good to help not only affirm the belief of those listening in the existence of God, but it'll also provide you with the means to have a real rational discussion on the subject that is rooted in philosophy and science, which is good. We want that rational argument to be verifiable and not just some type of heady, wishful thinking.
People will either love to have you after this at a dinner party, or you will be uninvited very quickly. So and both are good. So
So we're going to take a look at these 5 proofs that Aquinas has reasoned through. And again, he's not the forerunner of these. A lot of these proofs have been delved into in some fashion by earlier philosophers, but he really solidified things.
They're attributed to him more times than not.
I mean, he really refined
He codified them in some way.
Exactly.
They're his arguments.
But I think before we jump into Aquinas, some people may really ask, why not start with the Bible?
And the Word of God. Why wouldn't he do that?
And I think that's a good question. Some people would argue, well, there's no better way to go than the Word of God itself. Okay? And yes and no. And here's the thing. Most of us who believe in God do so because somebody else really chose God for us. And we thank God for that. We thank God that we had people in our lives.
That's why we're sitting here today.
Who made that decision. Our parents made that decision to have us baptized, raised in the faith, and we have been taught and and we have unconditionally accepted as fact that God exists. But when our belief is challenged, which I think happens a lot of times, in these conversations that we have with parents and others, where somebody in one of their loved ones, one of their children, has left the faith and no longer believes in God, it's because their belief kind of crumbled under the logical arguments that are made when people say, well, God, there can't be a God. Science is really truth, not this religion stuff. So we know stuff about God, and maybe we've never questioned, we've never really thought about it critically, and we've never made our faith something personal. And when that happens, our beliefs can kind of crumble under the weight of a rational argument. The good news is that Thomas's proofs, 5 proofs here, really provide us with the counter-rational argument for the existence of God. And once you have the reason part down, the matter of divine faith, the Bible, all of our religious beliefs, all of that stuff really comes to a head and is taken to a whole new level.
Right.
That just further exemplifies the truth of what it is.
Yeah,
that
now
we've
we're
shared
understanding
rationally
the character of God and qualities of God, right? But you've established the foundation of He's real.
Yeah.
And I even think sometimes good, faithful, lifelong Catholics, these questions creep in. They have in my own life, right? God's real, right? Yeah. And to be honest, I go back to these proofs sometimes when there's some kind of natural disaster happening, or I'm going through a period of suffering and I'm just feeling really low about my own personal belief. I think, well, I can feel however I want. It doesn't change the things that Aquinas established about the universe that are true and my existence and other areas that these proofs explain.
Yeah. So these 5 proofs actually are proofs for the existence of God, and what they reveal are certain inalienable qualities about God. But in order to really know more about God, something beyond the qualities, that's where divine revelation comes in, which is a whole other topic. Mm-hmm. That's where we got to go to the Bible to really see that, oh, well, God is a loving God. Well, that's not revealed in these proofs.
We're not going to use the word love almost at all.
At all, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I think people, when you're talking to them and they're hostile about it, the word love might be like a trigger for them too.
Sure.
So don't upset people unnecessarily, right? You want them to hear you.
Yeah, these proofs aren't going to reveal that God's merciful, loving, forgiving, any of those type of qualities. These are inalienable qualities about God's very nature.
Yeah.
That's the real proof for the existence of God. So we're going to jump into it, with our very first argument, which is the argument of motion.
The argument from motion. I love this. So, think about the way that things exist in the world. Everything moves. And everything that's in motion has been put into motion by something or someone else that's already in motion.
Acting upon it.
Yeah. Science tells us that energy isn't created or destroyed. It's just moved and transferred from one thing to another. That's pretty much the extent of my scientific knowledge. That's all I can do. I often in class, I have this moment because we go through these things in my courses. This is not an ad for them, but they're very good. But I have this moment where I take my dry erase marker and I chuck it across the room, partially to get their attention. But I say, oh, I have a dry erase marker here. I'm going to put it in motion. They see me putting it in motion. But I'm also put into motion by so many other forces. I have gravity upon me. There's things moving in my body that I'm not even controlling. Sure. So we're constantly caught up in this cycle of motion, right? Everything that is moving has been put into motion by something or someone else that's already doing that. And so Thomas says about that observable reality, which you really can't argue with. Not only am I moving in the world, but the world is moving, and the solar system that our world is in is moving, and the solar system is moving within the galaxy that it exists, and all of the universe is rapidly moving through space, and we have no reason why that's happening. Right? It's all moving. It's all motion. So Thomas says that it's really not the most reasonable thing to just conclude that this has infinitely been happening. That would just set up this infinite regression. And he says that infinite regression is not the most reasonable option. Motion has not always existed without a beginning because nothing else really exists like that. Everything in motion has been put into motion by something or someone else
acting
already in motion.
Right.
So then doesn't it stand to reason then that if everything has a cause, that motion would also have a beginning, an initial cause, something or someone else that puts everything in motion, but is unmoved itself. If you want to be really bold, you could say himself, but we don't even need to go there because now we're making God personal and you don't even need to do that just yet. I think motion is this wildly compelling proof for God as this unmoved mover. Because here's the thing, if he is moved, then he's just like me. He's just like me with a dry erase marker. He's just like me with a ball that I throw down a hill.
Right. And something must have caused him to move into motion.
Right. So that would be something greater than God.
Right.
So, and you don't even have to call him God. Thomas was perfectly content to just say unmoved mover. That could be a thing. That could be a person. We'll work that all out later. So what do you think about this one?
Well, I mean, you talked a little bit about this infinite regress, and that's an important philosophical concept that really plays into the first two proofs of Thomas's arguments here.
What does it mean for people who maybe don't understand that?
Right. So an infinite regress is the idea that something repeats itself infinitely, so that there really is no beginning and there's no end. It's almost like it's just a circle that just keeps going around.
You're going all the way
around
back
and
in time,
Yep.
but there really is no initial moment.
Yeah,
right?
so
it's always been like this.
It's always been like this. But we know that there has to be a cause. There has to be a starting point. We know that everything has a beginning, and we know that everything has an end. Even the universe has a beginning and an end. You were talking about that ball. That ball might just be sitting there, but something that acts upon it is going to set it into motion. Whether it's my foot, whether it's gravity, whether it's a strong wind blowing by, something's going to act upon it to set it into motion. If this went on for infinity, and
beyond. Sorry,
yeah.
I couldn't help myself. I'm so immature. I couldn't help myself.
If this went on into infinity, and we know that can't be, and here's how. I'll just give you a simple example, and I don't think this came from Dominic. It probably came from some other philosophers, because I don't think he had dominoes back then. But if you took an infinite number of dominoes.
What did you say about Saint Dominic? What were you saying?
Oh, Saint Thomas Aquinas.
Oh,
I did.
For a second, I thought, does he think that Saint Dominic invented dominoes?
No, I think I went Dominic because of dominoes. Okay. No, that's funny. No, Thomas Aquinas is who I meant.
Frankly, I was gravely concerned. Yeah. But okay. I was like, oh no, we're gonna have to have a talk later.
No,
okay.
No. But I'm glad you caught that. No, the idea being that if I had an infinite number of dominoes, and I'm setting them up, well, I would never be able to set them in motion, right? Because I'd never get to the end of setting them up. And so there's nothing to act upon that. So we know
really the beginning.
Right.
You're kind of thinking like, oh, we just keep setting them up. We keep setting them up.
Set them up.
So
there's
nothing
an infinite
ever
number.
moves.
I never get to the end, right? And nothing ever moves. And
it's not even dominoes. Like the whole point is that dominoes begins this way, and then it plays out, and then it ends. So It actually, the whole reality doesn't exist because it can't even get off the ground.
Right. And that's what Thomas reasons. He said, like, this is just logically impossible. It's illogical for this to even be a possibility. Right. So there has to be an unmoved mover. There has to be something that was unmoved itself, that had the potential and the ability to act upon something else, to set it in motion, and everything else that went in motion after that.
Because otherwise it's just like you and me, and that's not a reasonable option.
Right.
That everything would just be caught up in the cycle. Then it's just motion for the sake of motion, but motion nothing else exists like that.
And that kind of leads us into the second proof, which is really the argument from the efficient cause.
From the efficient cause.
And they're kind of related.
They are related. Yeah, because almost this causation one, like motion has to have a cause. So we've kind of talked about it in some way, because we're talking about beginnings and endings and all that. But look at all of creation. Everything has a creator. Everything has an efficient cause. Something or someone that caused it to be here. So I intentionally at this moment make my students deeply uncomfortable when I mention remind them that their parents caused them to be. Just like, someone made my iPhone, some people got together and caused them to be. And
I say that to my kids all the time. I love it. I love it because you see them squirm, but I always remind my kids, I always joke and said, you are the fruit of your mother and I's love. Right?
Yeah.
And it does. We don't think that way, but it does make you squirm when you think about it.
Well, if I think about my parents, I'm like, please, just somebody wash my brain out with soap or something. But it's an important thing to realize. Like, how did I get it? You didn't make yourself, number one. And somebody else had to intentionally create you. So Aquinas asked, if everything has a starting point, if everything has a source, if everything has a cause, then it's really not the most reasonable option to just say that everything, again, infinite regress comes in. Yeah. It's not the most logical thing to just say things have always existed from the beginning of time, right? Well, no, everything has a beginning point in time. People, things, all of that.
Going back to the domino example, I mean, it's great for both of these proofs. When we talked about it in regards to the first proof, you just can't have an infinite number of dominoes because then you never set anything in motion. And so that it's just logically impossible. Well, the same way is like if I'm setting these up, but they're infinite, well, then there's no beginning. There's no time when I started to set it up, and there's never going to be an end to the dominoes. They're just going to go on forever. And
So if nothing else works that way, why would that work that way?
Right. Yeah, nothing works that way. So that's, again, it's a logical fallacy.
Everything's a product of like cause and effect.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
People are the product of cause and effect. Things are the product of cause and effect. And so I always tell people, students, that yes, you could frame God like Aquinas did as this uncaused cause, or you could call him this uncreated creator, right? Because if he's created, once again, he's just like me. He's just like these things in the world.
Right.
So he's an effect. He's not the sole cause.
Yeah, and this idea, I think, therefore I am, it's an unsatisfying answer, and it's kind of like an easy way out, because nothing just blinks into existence of its own accord or volition. There's always a cause to something's existence. The universe isn't infinite. Life is not infinite. Therefore, this cause and effect that we see must have had a beginning, and there has to be an efficient cause for that beginning. So something or someone that always existed and is entirely uncreated and uncaused, but the cause of all things to be, that's what Thomas would say would be the uncaused cause.
Right. God. And if you want to call him God, we could, but let's start with the uncaused cause. Right. Okay, we're moving. So proof number 3. I find that things get a little bit more complicated at number 3 because 1 and 2 are so similar, but this one is very effective. This is the argument from necessity. Sometimes people call it the argument from contingency. So here Aquinas gets right at the root of this like philosophical question of why is there something rather than nothing? The likelihood is that there would be nothing rather than something.
Sure.
Right? The fact that all of this exists almost seems impossible. But our existence, you have to look at how you live your life. Our existence is very contingent. I'm not necessary. We like to think that we're like the center of the universe.
Well,
and
maybe
we're certainly
you do.
the center of the... Absolutely. We think that we are like kings of our little kingdoms.
My wife reminds me all the time that I'm not.
But I think that this proof is easily conveyed by saying that everything that exists is dependent. The minute you think that you're hot stuff, you have to be like, wow, I'm contingent on so many different resources and realities just to keep me here. I find so many things necessary. I'm dependent on so many things. And as much as I like to think that I'm necessary, I'm really not. If I wasn't here, the world would go on. The world would go on.
Right.
I'm contingent. The world is contingent. Everything in existence flows in and out of existence, right? Everything is caught up in the cycle of it's born and then it dies. Doesn't it stand to reason then that something would have to be purely necessary because we have so much contingency? Just to be able to use the word contingency, doesn't that imply that there has to be something that's not contingent? You're contingent on what? Other contingent things? Well, okay. Doesn't something have to be purely necessary for contingency to even exist? And that's what Thomas said. That's who Thomas says is God. Mm-hmm. God doesn't flow in and out of existence. He's not born. He doesn't die. He simply is. He is, or it is, if you even want to depersonalize it, God is that which is just necessary.
Yeah.
He who is necessary, if you will.
So there really has to be something that is eternal and infinite, something that has no potential for non-existence. Thomas would say for him that's God. Is the one who finds nothing necessary. He just is, and he is the one whom all contingency rests. There has to be something. That something, for Thomas, would have to be God. Now, the possibility of non-existence is very, very
I think
real.
this is such a cool way of looking at it.
It's so, like, we really don't fathom, we can't possibly fathom the odds of us being here at this time, in this moment. Take an acorn, for example. If it's not planted and provided with the required fertilization, water, and light, then the pine tree will never exist. It's going to remain a pine cone. It's going to remain an acorn, okay? If my parents waited a day, an hour, even a millisecond to consummate their love and conceive me when they did, I would not exist. I mean...
Well, let's get off this more quickly.
No. But the
I spontaneously generated
right.
it, but yeah.
The probability of any single one of us being born has been calculated to be 10 to the 2,685th power. So that's like 10 with 2,685,000 zeros after it. Just to kind of give you something to compare that by. 4 to the 17th power, and that's 4 with 17 zeros after it. If we had that amount of silver dollars, that would be enough to fill the entire state of Texas 8 feet deep. Now, don't ask me who calculated that. Like, I forget where I saw that at, but it's phenomenal. It's staggering, and that's just 17 zeros. Because again, like you have to go back to your like great caveman grandparent. If your great grandfather zigzagged right instead of left, trying to run from that saber-toothed tiger, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Right? You would not be here. So when you factor in all of those things, the timing and everything, you
almost shouldn't be here.
You should not.
Yeah, when you look at all of that evidence.
That's why Thomas says it's more likely that nothing should exist than something should exist.
But here's the thing. We do exist. Yeah. I do exist. Yeah. I don't have to exist, but I do, which makes the conversation about why I exist so much more interesting, which is a different conversation. But like, think about it. I'm not necessary, but I'm here. And the God of the universe finds me necessary at this point in time for whatever mysterious reason, right? He loves me at this particular point in time. I mean, it does open up so many things that we really do need to eventually be reflecting on, because if I am here, then I'm supposed to do something.
Right.
My life has purpose. It has meaning. And the only one who defines that is the one who deems it necessary that I'm here.
Right. We have answers for those theologically, coming from a religious perspective. But even philosophically, these are the existential questions that philosophers have wrestled with for years. Why do I exist?
Science can answer a whole lot.
What is my purpose?
It can't tell me that. Science does not tell me my purpose. It tells me things that I can do to stay here and all that. But why am I here? Science has never been able to tell me that.
Right. Because there's really no explanation or reason for why I'm here. The likelihood that I wouldn't exist is far greater than the probability that I would exist at this time and space.
And just that there's one necessary being that's holding all of this together as everything passes in and out. He is just all that really there is.
So just like there has to be an uncaused cause, who's the cause of everything, and just like there has to be an unmoved mover who set everything in motion, Thomas says that there has to be a non-contingent
reality
on
whom all contingency rests.
Upon whom everything else rests. There has to be an origin, a starting point for all of this that is itself not dependent upon anything else.
Right.
That is independent.
God just is. He just exists.
Yeah.
Right? I forget who said it. God is the one whose very nature it is to exist.
And I think coupled with that, I mean, Thomas kind of gets into this whole idea, like this uncaused cause, this unmoved mover, this non-contingent being has to be perfectly simple. Mm-hmm. That's really fascinating in of itself, because everything that we know is limited, defined by parts. The universe has a limited amount of matter and energy. Christine's coffee mug that she's drinking out of right now is defined by its limits.
That you bought for me.
Right. It has set dimensions and volumes. It's made of particular materials that are in and of themselves limited. And if this uncaused, unmoved creator of all thing had parts, was composed of parts, then it couldn't be unlimited.
Yeah.
It would be limited by definition.
And then it's just like me.
Right.
It's just like everything else in the world.
Right. And then everything just begins to fall apart.
And we've answered nothing.
You go back into this infinite regress, right?
Yeah.
And this is the point. This is where logic takes us when you begin to work through these arguments.
This episode's more fun than I thought it would be. This is fun. I'm having a blast. All right, number 4.
Our listeners' heads are swimming, as is mine right now. But
well, the nice thing is that you can listen to it again and again and again.
And it still won't make sense to you.
Yeah.
Or maybe it will, I hope. So the fourth argument.
Okay, so this is the argument from perfection.
And I like this one.
I do too. Yeah. And let's slow down just a moment, because this one, I think, warrants a bit of a slowdown.
And I think people would be able to maybe better relate to this one than some of the other ones.
You think?
I do, from a personal level.
Oh.
Yeah. But we'll see.
We'll find out. Yeah. This one would explain that we measure everything in the world in a series of degrees, right? We have minimums, we have maximums, and everything in between. We say that things are bigger or they're smaller, they're higher or lower,
Hotter, colder,
good or not good. You can take this
good
in a
or gooder.
moral, good or gooder. Oh gosh, you're making my good, good or goodest. That's how it goes, right?
Right.
So let just take that, good or not good, right? Let's take it in a moral way, perhaps. Who says that? In relation to what? What's the scale that we're using, right? If something is good,
Yeah, what's the marker?
what's the marker?
What are we measuring against?
What are we measuring against? Or maybe who are we measuring against?
Yeah.
What is this greatness that we're measuring up to? This goodness, you could say, that we're measuring up to.
That's why I love people who say, well, I'm a good person, in defense of not maybe practicing their faith or believing in God. I'm like, well, that may or may not be true, but who are you
Right.
measuring yourself against?
Right.
If it's the axe murderer
Says
up the
who?
street,
Right.
then yes, you're a good person.
Right.
But, if it's against Jesus Christ, then maybe we're falling a little short, right?
Right.
So
He's that benchmark.
right. So what is the benchmark? And
Because
I think that's what Aquinas is getting at.
in a
There
Christian
has to be
way,
a benchmark.
In our Christianity, we say that Jesus is that ultimate. But you can, even if you don't want to bring Jesus into the conversation, I think you have to agree that this world presents maximums, minimums, and maximums. So if we live in this world of degrees, well, what makes something compatible to like the highest order of that? Or what determines that something falls short of that maximum? So in order for us to measure anything in the world, there has to be an ultimate maximum, perfection, that we're measuring against.
Yeah, and that's where the philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, and Thomas Aquinas especially, they talk about these transcendental desires. And transcendental, it's just otherworldly, heavenly, divine desires is how some would put it in the context. But these desires that every human person longs for exist. We all long for perfect love. We all long for perfect beauty, perfect happiness, perfect justice, perfect truth. But here's the thing, none of us have ever experienced those things. I've never experienced perfect love. So how can I know that I've never experienced perfect love unless perfect love exists? There has to be an object of the desire for it to be even longed for.
So just in you saying that, then we have to be, and this is a different conversation, but there has to be something within us that's able to detect that something's falling short.
Yes.
And that's a very natural, law-oriented
Right.
business. That there's this business of minimums and maximums, and God as this ultimate standard of perfection is written on our hearts.
Yeah.
We can silence it. We cannot pay attention to it. But you can go to a schoolyard, and if a kid is being treated badly, and maybe he's never been told this is how you treat somebody positively or negatively, he knows, oh, that person, like that kid
That's
has
wrong.
been mean to me,
Yeah.
right? How does he know that? He knows in some way that he's been unloved.
Yeah.
Well, where does the knowledge of that comes? It's internal.
Yeah, that's again. We're. I don't want to go off topic because this is a whole nother thing. But
I would like to go off topic.
but no, seriously. But we're hardwired.
Right.
We're hardwired to, again, because of
For
this
this
intellect.
perfection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're hardwired because of this intellect we have to know something otherworldly, something beyond ourselves. We have these transcendental desires, but they don't have an object. There's not something that we can point to like, there's perfect beauty, there's perfect truth, there's perfect justice. Over there is perfect happiness. There has to be an object. And even if we think that I've experienced perfect love, like, oh, well, you don't know my marriage. My marriage is perfect, perfect love, everything, or perfect happiness. In the back of your mind, you're always wondering, is there something else? Is there something greater than this? Am I missing out
Yeah.
on something?
It's like a FOMO in
Right.
some way.
So, and that's why I think people can relate to that because we know that, like, yeah, like I just want perfect happiness. I just want to experience true, or we might say perfect, but we say true. I want to experience true love. I want to experience true happiness. I want to
joy,
experience
yeah.
true joy and true beauty. Well, we know from our own experience that no one has ever experienced that, and yet we long for it. So there has to be an object for that. And for Aquinas, that's evidence that there must be something greater than ourselves that is perfect love, perfect happiness, perfect joy, perfect truth.
Just the ultimate maximum and experience of
Yep.
all of these things that we know that we experience partially.
Yeah.
That we know are true to the human experience, but maybe we haven't really realized the full truth of them.
Right. And
Yeah.
so again, for Thomas, the object of those things leads us to God.
Yeah. If something is good, it's because God is good. God is the perfection that we're always measuring against or measuring up to. And God doesn't just have this perfection, he is it. That's different. That's a different statement. God doesn't just have love, he is love. God doesn't just have perfection, he is perfection. So
He is truth.
he's the full
He is
experience
justice.
of all of this, right?
Right.
He doesn't just have motion, he is motion. So it can kind of go back to other proofs too.
Yeah. The
God
fourth.
is perfection.
And that leads us to our final proof, which is the argument from intelligent design. And I think that this is something that people might have an easier time relating to too, because it really is, the beauty of this one is it's really rooted in natural law and specifically the law of physics. So for those of us who are really, if somebody is coming at you from a science type argument, maybe
Start with this one,
Start
maybe.
with this one. This might be a little bit easier for them to relate to, and then you can work your way backwards into the other ones. But every scientist will admit that there is order and design to creation. I mean, if they're not willing to see that point, then I'd begin to take a look at their credentials. There are systems in place that organize things, ecosystems here where everything is dependent and working together and perfectly balanced until we get our hands in there and muck everything up. Right?
Sin ruins a lot of
Right,
this
right.
proof, but let's take that out of the equation for just
Right.
a moment.
But again, there are universal laws for gravity. There's specific formulas for energy, the speed of light, even the mass of electrons, protons, and neutrons. All of those things are known and established. So, for example, if I drop a rock from a certain height, it's always going to fall to the ground because of gravity acting upon it, the law of physics that comes into play. Aquinas reasoned that things that lack intelligence, that lack reason and intellect, such as plants, inanimate objects, even non-human animals, they all act for an end. They follow the laws of the natural world. The point being that this isn't random or this isn't by chance. And scientists often refer to the fine-tuning of the universe, where you have these cosmological constants that are known and established by science. And if any single one of these constants, even if gravity, for example, was changed, the constant for gravity experienced 1/millionth of 1% change in that constant, life would cease to exist in the universe. Now, that's not to say that life wouldn't exist on our planet, life wouldn't exist in our galaxy, life would not exist in the entire universe if any one of these constants were monkeyed with in a certain way and changed by even the minutest percent.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So again, it's far more likely that there's nothing rather than something.
Exactly. That kind of goes back to that argument. But Thomas would say that it stands to reason that if chance alone cannot explain this, then it must be by design. And if it is by design, then there must be an intelligent designer behind it. If, again, go back to the painting. If I see a painting, I can assume that there is a painter. If I hear a piece of music, I can assume that there is a musician, a composer behind it. If I hear a song on the radio, I can assume that there is a singer who exists that is creating it. And so when I look at all of creation, the laws of physics and the laws that science has given us, and I see how ordered and everything is interconnected and it's not here by chance, there's a fine tuning that had to take place in order for all of this stuff to even exist, then I can assume that there has to be a creator behind creation, an intelligent designer behind the design. And it's interesting because today you do have a certain segment of scientists. Now, it's interesting. Most people think that scientists are not religious, that they're anti-God, but that's not the case. I think it was a study that was done probably within the last 10 years or so that showed that most scientists, the greater number of scientists, I forget the percentage, but I know it's over 50%, are actually deists. They do believe in God, right? They do believe in God. But there are some hard-nosed non-believers that are so rigid in their attempt to explain away the fine-tuning of the universe that they've come up with all of these speculative theories about the existence to explain it away. And speculative theories are just that. There's no scientific evidence. This is just somebody just spouting out a theory like, well, maybe it could be this, and maybe we should try to look to prove this. But things like the multiverse and other things that you hear in science, like bubble universes, all of
These are new words
yeah,
to me.
yeah. All of these things are all speculative science. There's no scientific evidence that points to these things, that points to the exist. There's nothing to back
Even
them
the
up.
possibility of them.
Even the
You're saying it's
possibility
just-
of them, right? Unlike the Big Bang Theory, there's plenty of scientific evidence that supports the Big Bang Theory. There's no such scientific evidence that supports things like a multiverse or a bubble universe. And so it's speculation. But the thing is, in the human psyche, we think that these things exist because things like Disney and Marvel have made them common day things.
Isn't that called it's like the Marvel multiverse?
The multiverse,
okay.
right. So
that's the extent of my Marvel knowledge.
So we have things like the shows with like Loki and shows with Spider-Man and Doctor Strange where this multiverse exists. I hate it, by the way.
And they're all
I absolutely
interconnected. Is
hate
that
it.
the idea?
Yeah,
Okay.
and they're interconnected. Even the latest Deadpool movie with Wolverine, it was all rooted in the multiverse because everybody knows Wolverine died in his very last show. But we were able to bring him back because of the multiverse, right? It's a great science fiction way to resolve problems, but to try to resolve the problem of fine-tuning of the universe, it falls flat.
Right.
It falls flat. But the argument from intelligent design is really, I love that argument because that's a good starting point for when you begin to argue. But I would encourage you, we're just giving you like a little synopsis.
Sure.
You really, I mean, these are things that we would encourage you to kind of maybe do a deeper dive in so you can understand it yourself and be able to articulate it in a way that maybe you and I are not conveying.
I think about it in the sense of everything. Again, if you just open your eyes, you see how smart the world is. You'll see that it's moving. You'll see that everything has a creator. You'll see a lot of these proofs just right in front of you. How about just how intelligent everything seems to be on the smallest level, right? The cell, the atom, the cell seeks to divide and grow and all of that. And all of this is happening on the most microscopic level, right? Well, does anything just become accidentally intelligent? No, it doesn't. It seems as though, I think Thomas would say the more reasonable conclusion is that it's been endowed with this intelligence. Yeah. I think about like plants. They're facing one way in the beginning of the day, and they are intelligent enough to move with the sun. They know they have to stay alive. It seems as though everything in existence is ordered towards its best possible purpose. It's ordered towards self-preservation. It's ordered towards life. Things that don't have a rational mind even do this.
Yeah.
Cells, plants, things like that.
Phyto.
Children, like babies, seek to nurse on their mother within the first 45 minutes of life. No one's told the baby to eat. The baby just is intelligent enough to know.
And it knows what to look for.
I have to,
Right.
I'm going to start rooting, right? There's got to be food around here somewhere. And it's just, is it more reasonable to think that everything just accidentally does these things? No. It's maybe been endowed by not one who is also intelligent, but intelligence itself.
It's more unreasonable to believe that.
It is,
than reasonable.
And I think about, we don't become accidentally knowledgeable about things. We go to school. We have teachers and books impress knowledge upon us. So doesn't it stand to reason that the world would be like that as well?
Yeah.
That it would be endowed with knowledge by the one who is pure knowledge. I think that's way more reasonable.
And let's just say, like, down the line, science is able to provide proof for the existence of a multiverse or these bubble universes. All that does is just move the proofs that Thomas Aquinas is really putting forth back one step. Because then you have to get back into, well, what is the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover?
Right, who made the multiverse,
Who made
folks?
the multiverse, right. It just moves it back a step.
It doesn't destroy any of these. It's just like, okay, let's reevaluate it in light of new scientific knowledge.
Right. It just moves it back a step. It's not going to be able to explain this stuff away.
Also, that's not going to happen. I can't imagine. Or we're not going to be here to figure it out anyway.
Can the listener just imagine an infinite number of Christines existed in other universes?
Can you imagine this world? Oh my gosh.
It's a horror flick.
Well, think about, okay, a multiverse. Does our world here and heaven, I mean, we can cross over to some existence between the two. I mean, there's a relationship between these two. I don't know. Is that kind of like a multiverse?
No.
No. All right. Fine.
No. Well, it's just another state of being.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's anything there.
No, it's good. No,
it's fun to think about. Again, I'm not saying that heaven's a place. I know heaven's not a place. There's different ways in which we can exist. And when we celebrate the liturgy, there's a oneness between these two states of being. So, just talking.
It's interesting, but that's
It's interesting.
Yeah. So where does all this stuff lead us?
It leads us to what we can know simply through intellectual reasoning, that there has to be an uncaused cause, that there has to be an unmoved mover, that there has to be something or someone out there who is perfect, who is simple, who's unlimited, who always is, doesn't flow in and out of existence, and who is knowledge itself.
Yeah.
And he's the reason that anything else, or it's the reason that anything else can grow in knowledge.
And
these things are simply true.
Right. And this it and this who, regardless of it or who, it's God. The purpose of these theological proofs is to prove that there has to be this being or this entity that exists.
We're not trying to depersonalize God.
Right.
I don't want you to misunderstand. But if you make him personal right away, well, then how is he personal? That's a theological conversation.
Right.
I don't know that people are always ready for that.
Right.
So let's just establish.
So we're just going just from the philosophical, scientific standpoint. All of the evidence, these proofs, lead us to a conclusion that there has to be an uncaused, unmoved, perfectly simple, unlimited, eternal, always existing, never created being
who's real.
He
really exists.
That brought everything else into existence. And again, for Thomas, coming from a religious perspective, he would say that was God. So we can use...
And that's enough for today.
Yeah, that's enough for today. Amen. But this is the starting point. This is the rational argument. You'll notice that we didn't talk about divine revelation. We didn't really talk about the incarnation of Jesus Christ. We didn't, we might have mentioned...
We didn't use a lot of love language.
We didn't use love language. We didn't go into the Bible. There's no scripture quotations or anything. All of this stuff is based upon intellectual reasoning.
And we can only do that because somebody gave us a brain.
Right.
So...
Who is this unmoved, uncaused
totality of all knowledge
right,
and
yes.
all everything. He's all in all, folks. So hopefully this better equips you to strengthen your own belief in God, right?
Or at least to know what the counter arguments are.
Yeah.
When people say, "Well, I don't believe in God," I'm a man of science. Oh man, I heard a kid getting confirmation prep
watching Nacho Libre.
Oh my gosh,
I believe in science.
10, 15 years ago, we were on retreat, and he says, "Well, the words he used was, I am a man of science." And then I just kind of hit him with all these stuff,
and he didn't. Too,
yeah,
buddy.
and he didn't know how to respond to that. I'm like, well, how do you explain this? How do you explain this? Science proves the existence of God. If you're a man of science, you cannot come away from that not believing in God. Right. You can deny it, just like I can throw away my belief in Jesus Christ anytime I want. Right. You're free to deny it, but you're denying truth. So that's it.
And you're a loser. No, I'm just kidding. Look at that. I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding.
I wonder what the other Christina in one of these other multiverses, how she would end that.
One's probably still asleep. One is... I think that's really good. Something I wanted to say is that as we're discovering how to do social media things, how to enter this world of podcasting, even though we're almost a year in, we're still learning new things all the time. If you like things, if you subscribe to things, it helps us with all of our algorithms and stuff like that. So if you communicate with us over our Podbean or our social media, it helps get this ministry out to more people. So if you're enjoying these podcasts, if you like what you're hearing, you can help us grow our ministry by commenting or liking us on whatever platform you're listening to us on.
Yeah.
It's very helpful.
Again, shoot us an email if you have questions at mmlpodcast@outlook.com. Our website is mmlpodcast.com. Prayer intentions, all those things, requests, just shoot them. We'd love to hear from you guys.
All right. We'll see you next time.
All right. God bless.